there are a very large number of people who are currently investing in these assets. And especially in the past year, it's taken off enormously in the US, as it has, I think, in much of the world. I think there's really two reasons that stand out. One is that during the pandemic, many government central banks, including in the US, began to print a lot of money, basically. I think the other thing that's happened in the past year is that many very well-known institutional investors and hedge funds have begun to hold this asset as part of a diversified portfolio strategy. I think it's a very interesting question to consider what happens in the long term, not only when the central banks begin introducing their own digital currencies, as China is already doing, but I think the real interesting possibility is that the big social media companies in the US, of course, Facebook and Google and Amazon, maybe others. In China, we've already seen with Alipay and Tencent. I think there may well be a three-way competition between the private digital currencies, those that are controlled by big media companies, and those that are controlled by central banks. And it's going to lead to a very interesting dynamic over the next 10 years when many people will, I think, begin to reconsider the nature of money, whether money needs to be connected to a government. And in the long run, I think trust will determine who wins this. It's hard to know, and I would think that there's going to be much more innovation, that maybe the ones that we use in the long run have not yet been introduced and developed. But classically, money has had three functions. It's a medium of exchange, a unit of account, and a store of value. And what we're seeing now with cryptocurrency is that some of these play only one of the three roles. In other words, you don't rely necessarily on the same instrument to do all three things. So Tether, for instance, has become a very popular medium of exchange, but it's not a unit of account at all. People still denominate Tether in the US dollar. So the dollar still plays the role of the unit of account. But Tether is a much more efficient medium of exchange for people who trade online. And I would say that Bitcoin is the leading store of value for people. So I think you'll always have those three needs that people will have that have in most of history been met by one instrument that we've called money. But it may be that to meet those three different functions, you'll have three different coins. Maybe one of them issued by a government, maybe not. We'll have to see. No, in fact, I think I was the first person to write a paper and say that. I completely agree with that. But I think it may work well as one of the three things. A cryptocurrency may end up being a reasonable store of value, if not a good unit of account or good medium of exchange. And I think the development of the stable coins in particular has been an effort to address some of this. So the volatility is a major issue. It's certainly the reason that it can't meet all three needs at once, at least not in one instrument. But I think it has motivated people to innovate, to think about how to control that volatility. And in the long run, it may be that technology and software can do a better job of that than central banks can do. We've had many scams in this area, and in particular, the time of the initial coin offerings 3 or 4 years ago, there were a lot of promoters who essentially committed fraud by getting people to invest in ventures that didn't really exist. This is not new in finance. There have been scams and Ponzi schemes and all kinds of other things as long as there have been investors. And I'm not sure that cryptocurrency is really much different than what we've seen throughout history. So I think it's a problem, and no investor should purchase anything that they don't understand and don't have a good idea of the risks that they're taking. But there are people who invest very impatiently. They're interested in the gambling aspect of it, the entertainment value. And I do think they're vulnerable to losing their money very quickly, especially in this asset class that has a lot of volatility. But scams did not begin with cryptocurrency, and I think they will always exist as long as there are speculative investors.